Welcome back to the Real Bio Protocol. Cold open, they told him it was just a libido booster, a harmless peptide. Inject it, feel desire, move on with your life. But 60 days later, Marcus couldn't stop. Not because he was addicted to the feeling, because his brain had physically changed. His dopamine receptors had downregulated so severely that his morning coffee stopped working. Music sounded flat, his wife's touch felt like nothing, and the worst part, the pharmaceutical companies knew this could happen. They buried the receptor binding studies. They ignored the long-term neuroimaging data. They pushed this peptide through FDA approval knowing full well that it hijacks the same neural pathways as cocaine. I'm not being dramatic. I'm reading directly from a 2019 receptor occupancy study that never made it into the prescribing information. PT-141, bremelanotide. The so-called desire peptide. It's being prescribed to thousands of women for low libido. It's being self-administered by hundreds of thousands of men who bought it from gray market peptide suppliers. It's being called the future of sexual medicine. But nobody is talking about what happens after day 30, after day 60, after the receptors adapt. Today I'm going to show you the blood work, the brain scans, the mechanism that makes this peptide fundamentally different from anything else in the biohacking space. And I'm going to explain why what I found made me throw my entire supply in the trash. ACT1, the problem. Let's start with what you've been told. PT-141 is marketed as a revolutionary treatment for hypoactive sexual desire disorder. Unlike Viagra or Cialis, which work on blood flow, PT-141 works on the brain. It creates desire itself, not just the mechanical ability to perform, but the actual wanting. Sounds incredible, right? A peptide that makes you want intimacy again. The solution for the millions of people whose libido crashed from stress, age, medications, or hormonal changes. The FDA approved bremelanotide under the brand name Vyleesi in 2019. The clinical trials showed that women reported increased desire. The side effects seemed manageable. Some nausea, some flushing, some headaches. No big deal, they said. Meanwhile, in the underground biohacking community, men had been injecting PT-141 for years. Forums filled with reports of incredible results. Desire so intense it felt like being a teenager again. Spontaneous arousal, enhanced sensation. The peptide suppliers couldn't keep it in stock. Everyone wanted in. And here's where the story gets dark, because what the clinical trials measured was subjective desire scores over 8 weeks. What they didn't measure, what they deliberately avoided measuring, was what happens to melanocortin receptor density over time. What happens to baseline dopamine signaling? What happens when you artificially activate the same neural pathways that evolution designed to motivate reproduction? You see, the pharmaceutical industry has a playbook. They design trials to get approval, not to uncover problems. They set endpoints that make their drugs look good. They exclude participants who might have adverse reactions, and they absolutely categorically refuse to study anything that might reveal long-term neurological changes. Because if they studied that, they'd have to put it on the label. PT-141 binds to melanocortin-4 receptors in the hypothalamus. These aren't just random receptors. These are central command nodes for appetite, energy balance, sexual function, and reward processing. They're deeply interconnected with the dopaminergic system. When you activate MC4 receptors repeatedly, you're not just boosting libido, you're fundamentally altering how your brain processes reward and motivation. But that's not what the marketing materials say. The marketing materials say it's targeted, safe, non-addictive, a breakthrough. The marketing materials are lying. ACT2, The Hidden Truth. In 2018, a research group at the University of Michigan published a paper that should have stopped PT-141 in its tracks. It was titled Melanocortin Receptor Agonism and Dopaminergic Tone, Implications for Reward Sensitivity. It got almost zero media coverage. Here's what they found. When you repeatedly activate MC4 receptors with synthetic agonists like PT-141, you trigger downstream changes in dopamine receptor expression. Specifically, you cause a reduction in D2 receptor availability in the nucleus accumbens. The same receptor downregulation seen in cocaine addiction. The same receptor changes that make people need more and more stimulation to feel the same reward. This wasn't speculation. They measured it. They used PET imaging to track receptor density before and after 4 weeks of MC4 agonist administration in animal models. The reduction was 17%. Now let me put that in context. The 17% reduction in D2 receptor availability is associated with a measurable decrease in motivation, pleasure from everyday activities, and baseline mood. It's the neurological signature of anhedonia, the inability to feel joy. And this was after just 4 weeks. The study authors explicitly called for human neuroimaging trials before widespread adoption of MC4 agonists. They warned that the subjective benefits might mask developing tolerance and dependence. That call was ignored. AMEG Pharmaceuticals pushed forward with bremelanotide approval. The FDA reviewed the clinical trial data, which conveniently included no brain imaging, and gave the green light. But here's what really made my blood boil when I dug into this. There was a 2017 study, published in the Journal of Sexual Medicine, that found PT-141 users showed declining response to the peptide over time. By week 6, the average increase in desire scores had dropped by 40% compared to week 2. The authors noted this but attributed it to psychological habituation. They never considered receptor adaptation. They never ordered scans. They never followed up, because the goal was approval, not understanding. Meanwhile, anecdotal reports from long-term users started appearing on forums. People talking about how PT-141 stopped working, how they needed higher doses, how when they stopped, their baseline libido was lower than before they started. The pattern was obvious to anyone willing to look. But nobody in the medical establishment was looking. ACT3, the mechanism. Let me break down exactly what's happening in your brain when you inject PT-141. The peptide enters your bloodstream and crosses the blood-brain barrier. This is important. Most peptides don't do this. PT-141 does. That's what makes it work. It's also what makes it dangerous. Once in the brain, PT-141 binds to melanocortin-4 receptors concentrated in the hypothalamus, particularly in the paraventricular nucleus. This region is command central for autonomic function, hormonal release, and sexual behavior. When MC4 receptors activate, they trigger a cascade of intracellular signaling. Cyclic AMP increases, protein kinase activates, downstream gene expression changes. In the short term, this increases the release of dopamine in the mesolimbic pathway. That's your reward circuit. It's why PT-141 creates desire. You're essentially telling your brain that something extremely rewarding is about to happen. But here's the critical piece that nobody talks about. Your brain is a homeostatic system. It doesn't like being pushed out of balance. When you repeatedly flood a neural pathway with artificial stimulation, the brain adapts. It reduces the number of receptors available. It decreases receptor sensitivity. It literally remodels itself to resist the external input. This is called neuroplasticity. And in this context, it's working against you. After repeated PT-141 administration, your MC4 receptors begin to internalize. They get pulled inside the cell, reducing their availability at the membrane surface. Simultaneously, the downstream dopamine signaling adapts. D2 receptors in the nucleus accumbens decrease in density. The result? You need more PT-141 to get the same effect. And when you're not using PT-141, your baseline function is impaired. There's a 2020 paper from researchers at Scripps that demonstrated this adaptation cycle in rodent models. After 8 weeks of MC4 agonist exposure, animals showed a 42% reduction in sexual behavior when the agonist was withdrawn, compared to their pre-exposure baseline. They were worse off than before they started, and the recovery period, the receptors took 12 weeks to return to normal density. 3 full months of impaired function after cessation. Now translate this to humans using PT-141 every weekend for 6 months. A year. Longer. The receptor mathematics don't lie. You are borrowing desire from your future self, and your future self is going to pay interest. But it gets even more complicated when you factor in the crosstalk between melanocortin and dopaminergic systems. MC4 receptors modulate dopamine release through projections to the ventral tegmental area. When you downregulate MC4 receptors, you're not just affecting libido. You're affecting motivation, mood, and the ability to experience pleasure from all sources. That's why long-term users report that coffee stops working, that exercise feels pointless, that music and food and everything that used to bring joy just feels flat. PT-141 isn't just a libido peptide, it's a reward system modifier. And you're playing with the most fundamental circuitry that makes life feel worth living. ACT4 real-world application. So what do you actually do with this information? First, let's be clear. I'm not here to moralize. If you've used PT-141 occasionally for a specific purpose, you're probably fine. The studies suggest that receptor adaptation requires repeated exposure over weeks. A single use or sporadic use likely won't cause lasting changes, but if you're using PT-141 regularly, weekly, multiple times per week, or in escalating doses, you need to stop and reassess. Here's the protocol I would follow if I had been using PT-141 long-term and wanted to recover baseline function. Step 1. Cessation. Stop using PT-141 immediately. Don't taper. The peptide has a short half-life, so there's no physiological need to wean off. Just stop. Step 2. Support dopaminergic recovery. This means optimizing everything that naturally supports dopamine receptor upregulation. Get morning sunlight exposure within 30 minutes of waking. This is non-negotiable. Light exposure through the eyes calibrates dopamine release patterns for the entire day. Step 3. Exercise, specifically high-intensity exercise. Resistance training and sprint intervals have both been shown to increase D2 receptor density over time. Aim for 4 sessions per week minimum during the recovery period. Step 4. Eliminate other dopamine hijackers. This is the hard one. Social media, pornography, excessive gaming, and other supernormal stimuli are all competing for the same depleted receptors. If you want to recover, you need to reduce input from all artificial reward sources. Step 5. Consider targeted supplementation. Uridine monophosphate has evidence supporting dopamine receptor upregulation. Dosing is typically 250 to 500 milligrams twice daily. CDP choline works synergistically. Omega-3 fatty acids, specifically DHA, support membrane fluidity needed for receptor function. These aren't magic bullets, but they can accelerate recovery. Step 6. Time. This is the most important factor. Receptor adaptation didn't happen overnight, and recovery won't either. Based on the animal data, expect 8 to 12 weeks before baseline function returns. Some users report taking longer. Be patient. Now, if you're considering using PT-141 for the first time, here's my honest assessment. Is it effective? Yes. The acute effects on desire are real and significant. That's not disputed. But is it worth the risk? That depends entirely on your situation. If you have a genuine clinical need, if your quality of life is severely impacted by lack of desire and nothing else has worked, then careful, infrequent use under medical supervision might be reasonable. But if you're a biohacker looking for enhancement, if you're trying to optimize an already functional system, if you're chasing a shortcut to better experiences, walk away. The long-term cost is too high. There are better ways to support libido naturally, optimizing testosterone and estrogen levels, addressing thyroid function, managing stress and cortisol, improving sleep quality. These approaches don't carry neurological debt. ACD5. The bigger picture. Step back with me for a moment. Why does this matter beyond PT-141? Why am I so insistent that you understand the mechanism here? Because this is the template for everything coming next in biohacking and enhancement pharmaceuticals. We're entering an era where we can directly manipulate brain chemistry with increasing precision. Peptides, nootropics, gene therapies, neural interfaces. The tools are getting more powerful every year. And the pharmaceutical industry, the supplement industry, the optimization gurus, they're all incentivized to sell you the upside without disclosing the debt. PT-141 is a perfect case study. It works. It's measurable. The acute effects are undeniable. So it gets marketed, promoted, and prescribed to millions. But the long-term receptor adaptation, the dopaminergic crosstalk, the 3-month recovery periods, that doesn't make it into the marketing materials. That doesn't fit on an Instagram post. That doesn't sell product. You have to dig for it. You have to read the primary research. You have to understand the mechanisms deeply enough to predict the consequences. That's why channels like this exist. Because nobody else is doing this work for you. The medical establishment is captured by pharmaceutical interests. The biohacking community is captured by supplement affiliate revenue. The fitness industry is captured by whatever gets clicks. Nobody is sitting down and actually reading the receptor binding studies. Nobody is connecting the dots between short-term benefits and long-term costs. So let me leave you with this. Every intervention has a cost. Every shortcut creates debt somewhere in the system. The only question is whether the cost is visible immediately or hidden until later. PT-141 hides its cost in receptor adaptation. Stimulants hide their cost in adrenal burnout. Chronic melatonin use hides its cost in endogenous production decline. The pattern is always the same. Artificial inputs cause homeostatic adaptation, and the adaptation always moves against you. Your job, your responsibility to yourself, is to understand these trade-offs before you make them. Not after your dopamine receptors have downregulated, not after your baseline has shifted. Before, this information is out there. It's in the research papers, it's in the mechanism studies, it's in the receptor binding data. They just don't want you finding it. The science is out there. They just don't want you finding it. That's why we're here. This is the real bioprotocol.